Hey guys, Stephanie here and welcome to the Aeroponic Tower Channel. This is where I share how I grow most of our food using aeroponic towers to support a plant-based diet. So a little bit about my background. I have been gardening for over 15 years, probably in the 20-year range, and I have done all the methods that I know of. I have done double dig, no dig. I had a permaculture food forest. I've done traditional rows, tilling the land, raised beds, all the things, back to Eden gardening, and really loved a lot of those. And each one served its purpose at that time that I set that particular type of garden up. But what I found over the years is some of those systems work great and I really enjoy them, but none of them ever replaced the things that I needed to purchase at the grocery store. I could replace some of the things I was buying at the grocery store depending on the seasons, time of year, but I could never replace the majority of the things. All of those gardens were supplemental. So I may have a ton of tomatoes for 1 month and then a ton of green beans for 1 month, but then the other 10, 11 months didn't have a lot of those foods and had to continue to go to the grocery store. And I am also not a canner. I have tried that route. I like to do things like salsa and hot sauces for canning, but I'm really not interested in growing a huge harvest of green beans and then canning them and having to eat canned green beans the rest of the year. And so I was really looking for a solution to replace a lot of those systems that just weren't working 12 months out of the year. And that's how I landed on growing things aeroponically using the tower gardens. So we are originally from North Florida, and in North Florida I tried several different ways of growing food and landed with a permaculture food forest being my all-time favorite, using Back to Eden. So I wood chipped everything very heavily and I loved that garden. It's the garden I miss the most. And the reason is I didn't have to haul in compost. I didn't have to do a lot of manual labor once I had my permaculture food forest set up. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically doing tiers. So you may have a fruit tree and then under that a berry tree, and then the next layer is herbs, and then under your herbs you could grow some lettuce and things like that. And you grow plants intentionally for the purpose of chopping them, cutting them down, and allowing that part of the plant that you've chopped down to lay on the ground and become mulch. So you're building soil from the bottom up instead of having to haul in compost. The problem I found with a permaculture food forest model, and really all the models I've used, like I mentioned before, is that it doesn't replace the grocery store. It's a great supplemental type gardening system. I had food 12 months out of the year in a food forest, and right now I do have food forest components out in my garden here, and we're in Western North Carolina now, and there are things I can go out and get, but it's very minimal and it's supplemental. It's not replacing the grocery store, which is what the towers do. So when we left North Florida, we actually sold everything we owned. I actually had a tower garden in North Florida and sold it to a woman who was doing some education things on different growing systems. And we moved into our camper and traveled the country trying to decide where we wanted to relocate. After a year, we chose Western North Carolina. So we are in a zone, I think about 6B. It's kind of tricky around here because we're in the mountains. And when we got here, I had envisioned we would buy a homestead with lots of sun and like rolling hills. And actually we bought 13.5 acres of mostly forest. And so after we closed on our house and we moved in and I started looking around at where I was going to garden, I kind of panicked because it didn't really dawn on me how much limited space we had for growing food. Our property has a ridge and then a little dip, and then it goes straight down the mountain, and we're kind of on this dip, and it's just a small portion of cleared land around the house and this garage that I'm in right now. But I did find a spot that my children didn't need for playing. That was grass at the time, and I started putting in garden beds that first season. And when I started digging, I realized it was all clay. really hard red clay. So I did the double dig garden method, and that's where you dig about 2 feet out, you break it all up, add compost. The idea with double dig is you're pulling the good rich soil from the bottom and putting it on the top. I had to chop up all that clay, add compost, put it back in, and I swore I would never do that again. It just was manual labor. It was very physically hard, and it required a lot of expense hauling in compost. And so the first year I did double dig, and then the second year I moved those same beds, I transitioned them to no dig garden beds, and that's where you're just adding fresh compost to the top of the soil, and you're not really disturbing what's underneath, so it keeps those weed seeds kind of buried so far down they can't get sunlight, keeps all of the microorganisms and the life in the soil going, is the idea with no dig gardening. So I did that, and the problem with that is where we are, compost is very expensive. I think it's very expensive most places these days now due to inflation, and it was very hard to get and to move. So I had to drive about 40 minutes, put it in the truck, get it out of the truck into the garden bed. So it was a very physically labor intensive and costly project to do that, but I did it. And when I was shoveling that compost out, it came from the only place that I knew of to get compost around here that was a reputable place, and I actually found that it was littered with microplastics. So somebody that they were getting their manures from was putting the manure into old feed bags, plastic ones, and the company I was buying the compost from was not dumping it out and getting rid of the plastic. They were actually just throwing the plastic bags into the little grinder thing, and it was ground up, and so I had all these strips of plastic in my compost. So that was gardening season spring 2020 that I did the no dig beds and added the compost. And I was already thinking, like, how is this going to be sustainable? For one, we're on a mountain and things wash down the mountain. So I started pulling rocks to line the beds and finding ways to line the beds so the soil would stay where it was supposed to be. Just trying to figure out, like, how am I going to garden in this climate? I've got this compost that's expensive. It's got microplastics in it, which is very upsetting to me. It's washing down the mountain. So I had all these problems. Gardened that whole season, took the winter to kind of evaluate, okay, what am I gonna do? Came into the spring of 2021 and just decided I'm gonna stick with the no dig beds, focus on putting rocks around each bed to keep the soil in. But this time I'm going to buy my compost in bags so that it could be a little bit better quality, since I had the microplastics and I did not want that again. So I purchased lots of compost in bags, which was even more expensive than buying it by the truckload and even more labor intensive because I had to go haul all these bags over and over and over again instead of giant wheelbarrows, which is a little bit easier. But that is how I set up my garden the spring of 2021. Well, shortly after that, a lot of people started making YouTube videos. Roots and Refuge was one. Jill Winger over at the Prairie Homestead had some issues with some soil, and people were starting to share how they had purchased organic good compost and actually found that it was polluted with forever chemicals. Or wasn't made with the right stuff. I'm not sure exactly what all the situations were, but I know over at Roots and Refuge Farm and a couple of other people, it was contaminated with forever chemicals, which would have been so devastating when I thought about all the time and all the money I had spent just putting fresh compost on my beds and my tiny little spot, which was the only spot I had to garden in our yard, how devastating that would be if I just put forever chemicals into the one spot I had to grow food on our property. Thankfully, we did not end up with contaminated soil, and I was able to grow food in that garden, but it really planted this seed that I need to find a better system. This is not gonna work. I don't enjoy canning and preserving the large amounts of green beans and tomatoes and things that were coming out of my garden the 1 month or 2 months in the end of the summer. Our season runs a little bit late, so we get food like at the very end of summer at the same time you're trying to start a fall garden. because I was putting a lot of fresh compost and having to hold those beds up with different materials, I had slug problems. So any greens, you know, these beautiful lettuce and things that I can take off my tower that are clean. When I was pulling lettuce out of my no-dig beds, I had a lot of slugs. I fed my husband a couple of salads where he found slugs, which is never fun. So I just was set on finding a different way moving forward. So I started researching what other methods there were out there to grow food that I had not already tried or I wasn't familiar with. I also really wanted to go back to my food forest style gardening because that was the garden I enjoyed the most. And I knew I could build the soil from the bottom up, like I mentioned, so I didn't have to worry about hauling in compost. I didn't have to worry about contaminants coming into my garden. I could worm compost, have some chickens, and do a chop and drop method to build soil. I can grow lots of herbs, flowers, and a lot of food, just not a lot of grocery store food. So blueberries, for example, I can grow amazing blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries grow here. So we have a season where that stuff is in abundance and I don't have to buy fruit at the grocery store for that month. But I'm not going to get a lot of green peppers 8 months out of the year and, you know, tomatoes 8 months out of the year, or fresh, clean greens to eat in a salad and make smoothies with every day with that kind of gardening method. Started researching, came across hydroponic, and I was really leaning towards hydroponic. I love the concept. I love the amount of food you could grow. But what I ran into was that hydroponic systems, for one, they're flat, so they would take up more space than growing vertically. And you had to have two different kinds of systems to grow different foods. So you could grow a ton of greens in one type of system, but you needed buckets if you wanted to do the green beans and the peas and eggplant and tomatoes and all of those things, peppers. So it got complicated and expensive. It was gonna take up too much space. And then really, it was the lighting. I couldn't figure out how to mount lighting over those when I was gonna grow inside, because the goal was to grow grocery store type foods 12 months out of the year. Started researching lights, and that's what led me to the Tower Gardens site. And they had created a new light system for their towers. And the new lights they had were different than my original tower that I had in Florida. And this one, it's almost, oh, it's gonna squeak, like an octopus arm. So it comes all the way out and it goes back in and it's on a timer. The reason why this was so eye-catching to me and just really kind of sold me on this concept was because I could grow bigger plants. I could grow a tomato. I could grow, this is broccoli. These are cabbage, squash. I've got some zucchini and squash over here. This is dill. And as the plants get bigger, I have control over where this light goes, so I can push it out so that they get light. And then when I have new seedlings, sorry, it's very squeaky, I can push it in and give those smaller plants the light that they need to thrive and grow. So when I saw the lights, I was like, I was kind of on this, like I was stuck when it came to lighting with hydroponics. I actually was really sold on doing hydroponics, even though it was going to require a lot more space that I didn't really have and be kind of limiting on what I could grow. But the lights were so overwhelming to me that when I saw the lighting system on this aeroponic tower, it was like, that just solved the problem. And then I remembered from when I had it in Florida, I'm not limited on what I can grow in this tower. There are so many different foods that you can grow in this tower, and I'll take you guys on a tour in just a minute to show you. But I made a list the other day. I think I have easily over 20 different types of foods growing on my towers right now. And I have things like bell peppers in the baby phase. I have some that are more mature. I have some baby tomatoes that will be ready and fruiting the end of February, early March, which is, March, like 4 or 5 months before I'll ever get tomatoes outside in a garden that's outside. So it allows me to have food a lot earlier in the season, a lot later in the season. And really, if you're smart about how you plant your tower, and if you have a couple of them, you can make sure you have food in the fruiting stage all the time, which is something I'm working on right now, like how to master when planting those seeds. So as the seasons change, you can roll right in from having tomatoes to having tomatoes again, instead of ending the tomato season and waiting another 6, 7, 8 months. So in December 2022, I purchased my towers, started growing on them right away, and it all came back to me. Everything I had learned in Florida when I was using these, plus so many ideas on how to maximize this type of system to grow food 12 months out of the year, to make sure I have access to grocery store style foods 12 months out of the year, and really just kind of take back control of what we do eat, what we can eat, and how much we spend on food. Food inflation, I don't know where it is for you. Here, because we're up in the mountains, it's already more expensive to get food, especially in the off seasons. But even in the farmers markets, just because the cost of living has gone up so much, and all of the expenses, that you're almost paying more at the farmers markets to buy the best quality food. You actually are paying more at the farmer's market to buy the best quality food versus even at the grocery store. But at the grocery store, lettuce can be up to 2 weeks old by the time it gets to the grocery store. It can sit in the grocery store a few days, then it goes and sits in your fridge until you decide to eat it all. So it really isn't the most nutrient dense food. I also did some research over the last few years on pesticides and things that are sprayed on our foods. And kale, for example, that's marketed as a superfood. Everybody serves kale now. You can go to a fast food restaurant, I think, and buy kale salads, like Chick-fil-A has one in different places. And what they fail to mention is that kale has been known to have as many as 21 different pesticides found on it. So it's a superfood, but it's highly contaminated because now it's commercial and it's grown in mass production because it's this hip thing to eat now, unless you're buying it organic. And then organic's expensive. I went to Trader Joe's the other day and they had a plastic container that you would buy ribbed, like hearts of romaine in. And it used to be 3 hearts of romaine in one of those plastic containers. And when I looked in there, it was 1 piece of a heart of romaine and the lettuce that had fallen off, like the leaves that had fallen off. So there were maybe 10 big leaves in there with some little pieces of the heart. It was absolutely crazy because you've got this plastic container with a plastic cover that's going to sit in a landfill for 400 plus years, not 40 years. And that was all for 15 pieces of lettuce. It actually cost $3.98 as well. I did not buy it, but it's very expensive. It's not environmentally friendly to be purchasing food in all these plastic containers. That plastic has to go somewhere. And I found that a lot of it was going into my compost. We know it's in our water. We know it's found in our bodies. So anyway, there's also the issue of water. So a lot of places are suffering from droughts right now, a lot of countries actually. And this system, it's an aeroponic system. So you can hear there's nothing going on in the background right now. It's just hollow inside. The roots grow and they kind of sit on this ledge that's inside so that they don't go straight down into the tank. And they're in air most of the time. And the air is what allows them to be efficient at absorbing nutrients. And then the water's in the tank on the bottom and it's set on a timer and it will go up to the top reservoir and then drip down on those roots a few minutes every hour. So it's very efficient with water. It only takes about 5% of the water that traditional food growing does for standard lettuce and different things like that. So you're using 5% of the water. And I had that same problem with my garden beds outside. I had to run sprinklers. I had to put in watering systems depending on which gardens I was talking about. And if I can do something like a permaculture food forest outside, that's a self-contained system that you don't have to water. Where if you're doing raised beds or traditional row beds or no dig beds, those require consistent watering to get quality food. So you can have a raised bed and you can water it with the hose, but your food production is going to be way less than if you had it on a timer and where it was giving it the exact amount of water it needs to produce that fruit to its optimal level. Well, this does it all by itself. You don't have to worry about it. So that's what I liked about these two. Really cut back on our need for water. Just limiting the complications of having to water and set up systems and the cost. So there are a couple of aeroponic systems on the market, and I only own Tower Garden, so I'm not going to speak specific to those, but I will speak specifically to why I chose Tower Garden and the boxes it checked for me, because there was a few that were very, very important. And the first one being the cost. So I've seen some systems where you have to buy special things to put in that system, and you're reliant on that company that provides that special thing. These, you can go to any hydroponic store, online, in person, and the materials that we use in our Tower Garden translate over to other hydroponic systems. So rock wool is what we put our seeds in, our seedlings, to start them, to put the plant in here. There's what we call little cages. You can use coconut coir to start your seeds in. And then there's minerals. Tower Garden has its form of minerals, but there are lots of different companies out there that make minerals for an aeroponic hydroponic system that you can use in the tower. So that keeps my cost down. So it cost me, when I'm running the lights in this building, which is a garage, and running the power, it cost me anywhere from 49 cents to 69 cents to grow a full giant head of lettuce. So that's a huge difference from what we're seeing at the grocery store right now. And that was important to me. Can I keep my cost really, really low by growing food in an aeroponic tower and make it worth it? You don't want to grow. Actually, the food I grew in my no-dig beds over last year probably cost me more than if I would have just bought organic food from the grocery store, because of all the things I had to bring in to make those gardens growable. So that was important to me, keeping the cost super low and making sure I could buy the things I wanted to buy. I do get my stuff from Tower Garden because it's very cost effective, but I don't have to. If I needed to go locally, I could get it locally. If I wanted to order from a different website, I could. Second thing, a system that I can manage by myself. I wanted to make sure that this could be my thing and I didn't have to rely on hauling things, moving things, having the children help me, asking my husband help me build things. I just wanted to be able to grow my food and manage all my systems by myself. So these are light and they're easy to manage, so it checked that box. Plastics leaching into the water. I know there are some out there that have been tested and they have found that this material, not on the Tower Garden, but on those, they're low quality materials. If you make one yourself with like PVC, same thing. Those products can leach chemicals into the water and then those chemicals go into your plants. I did not want that. This system, they did some tests and after 10 years of being in the sun, it had 0 nanoparticle breakdown. So that was important. The lights, I need to be able to grow year round. So in the summer, these smaller towers, which is the home tower, go into our house that's air conditioned. And I grow lettuce in the dead heat of the summer when lettuce outside would be really bitter and buggy. It grows great inside because I have the system and a light I can put on it and I don't have to worry about it. So something that was easy with lights. And 5 was variety. I wanted to make sure I could grow almost anything in my towers or whatever system I chose. And these I can. I've got green beans. I'm going to take you guys on a tour in a minute and show you some of the things that I'm growing. But here I can grow a tomato next to a lettuce, next to a cabbage, next to a broccoli. All of it grows in here. You can't do deep root vegetables like carrots and potatoes, but I do grow turnips on my tower all the time. I make sure I have turnips growing full time because I love those. Kohlrabi is another good one. So variety, being able to grow a lot of variety. So here on the Aeroponic Tower Channel, I'm going to be sharing all things how to grow hydroponic, aeroponic. If you don't have a tower garden, if you have a different model, it still translates over. If there were to be a model that comes out that checks all those boxes, I would be more than excited to try that as well. This is just what works for me to grow the most amount of food. So I'm going to share how I do that. How do I grow all this variety 12 months out of the year? And then I'll be sharing some on how then we also use it to fill a plant-based diet. So I'll get more specific in different videos on what I'm growing, why I'm growing it, when to grow it, how to plant it, how to rotate it out, because there are things where on your tower you want to plant them. There are helpful tips. Different varieties of lettuce taste a lot better when grown hydroponically and have a better texture than other things. So for today, I just want to do a quick video, show you guys some of the things that I'm growing, just to give you an idea of how much you can actually accomplish. This is about a 3 square foot space that you would need for one tower. So in this tower, I have cabbage, dill, broccoli. I grow broccoli this time of year inside for the little florets. This one's producing one right now, but more for the leaves. So if you were to grow this outside in season, it grows beautiful broccoli. Inside with aeroponic lights, with these lights, you're not going to get that giant head of broccoli, but you will get the leaves, and the leaves contain just as many nutrients, if not more. I grow it specifically for things like selenium, calcium, vitamin K. This is a plant called chervil. It's in the parsley family. Chervil is, the flavor is licorice, so it's really good in smoothies, but it's really high in bioflavonoids, and that helps you to absorb vitamin C. And I grow some specific plants specifically for vitamin C that I will share on a different video because I don't have those planted. I just started the seeds. This is some lettuce. I have at least 10 different varieties of lettuce on this tower. There are collards. So this is a collard green growing over here. I grow these for the greens and smoothies and then to make wraps with. They're super soft when they're on the tower. I have some squash growing down here, some yellow squash. Towards the bottom, I have some Swiss chard, dill, I have some cabbage going to head here, more of these broccoli leaves that I'm actually going to harvest for some juicing today, some chives. All right, and on these towers over here, I have some Chinese cabbage. I have more regular cabbage, sage, parsley, more Swiss chard, lots of lettuce varieties, some tomato plants towards the bottom here that are in their small phase, some tatsoi, which is a cruciferous vegetable, really good in salads, kale, arugula. Back here, more dill. I have some turnip, lots of kale, arugula, cilantro. Cilantro is an excellent one to grow on your tower. On some of my other towers, I have celery, green beans, peas, zucchini. I have some cucumbers started, peppers, eggplant that's started. Those aren't in the fruiting phases yet, but will allow me to be several months ahead of the season. So I hope you will join me on this journey of learning how to grow food 365 days a year using an aeroponic tower system. And how do we increase the amount of nutrients we're putting in our body? How do we reduce our cost for food in these times and our resources and the ease of how we can grow food? All of that is what I'm going to be covering here so that we can really master the aeroponic tower. So thank you guys for hanging out with me with my gardens today. I look forward to making more videos like this. This is what I do. I homeschool my kids, and in the spare time I come out here and I plant things and I harvest things for smoothies and harvest things for dinner and think about what I need to plant so that we constantly have food and we're relying less on the grocery stores. We're reducing our exposure to toxins and pesticides and just really taking back control of what we're eating and what we have to purchase and where we're spending our money. And it fulfills a lot in me, and I hope to be able to pass that on to other people. I also hope to make this easier. This comes naturally to me. Plants have always made sense to me. I understand how to grow them and what they need, and I can look at them and kind of maneuver through. It's just a gifting, and I know that's not a natural gift for everybody. So a lot of this page will be equipping others who may not just look at this and understand how to do it naturally, who may want more details on exactly step by step, how do you do it? How do you put the right seeds in? How do you know when it's not going well? What do you do when it's not going well? Things like that. So I hope you will join me. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will see you again soon.